Yeah, so gospel coaching began, of course, several years ago, back in the mid 2000s. We didn't have quite the burnout that we're having right now, I think, at that time. But the service that it provides is a safe friendship, a one-on-one relationship that's different than going to see a counselor or a therapist, because it's connected to two things. It's connecting both the strategic nature of ministry and the heart part of ministry. It makes sure that those two are connected or interrelated. They're interrelated. And so what happens in a gospel coaching conversation or a relationship you have is leaders today have a myriad of decisions to make, and they're bombarded on a daily basis with all sorts of different issues. And the question really becomes, I think, for a leader, a Christian leader, is, am I making the best decisions? How do I make better decisions? How do I know I'm making the right decisions? And that's in at least in the four aspects of a leader's life, is relationships. Like, am I making the best decisions for my family, for my marriage as a leader? Is this the right decision for my kids? Or the people that I'm serving? Is this the best decision I'm making personally for me, for my own health, my own mental health, my own education? And then also all the myriad of questions that come to us. I mean, we live in an age now where the complexity of ministry is way beyond what it's ever been. Pastors and Christian leaders are expected to know a lot about a lot. It's not just a shepherding role, where the pastor would, we used to tease about, and I think they still do, you only work one day a week. He's to be the teacher and the counselor and a strategic planner, and he's also involved in if he's in a denomination or in a certain tribe, he's got to be involved in those things as well. So, and then questions about their own spiritual relationship with God. And when you get into a one-on-one coaching relationship, that coach, the gospel coach, is guiding you, not giving you direction. It's not a spiritual director's role. It's not a counselor's role. It's not a mentor's role. You're actually able to ask strategic-oriented kinds of questions, and the gospel coach works alongside of you to make sure that the gospel is not lost in the art, in the complexity of all of what you're doing. So let's think about the church planting world. Years ago, in church planting, when I first started, there was no training, there was no resources. You were on your own, try to figure out how to start a church from scratch. And then we went through a very robust period where there was a lot of training, a lot of books came out, there was a lot of resources for church planters. Now, though, we've kind of lost that training period where there's formal training in church planting. And so what I'm finding now, which is kind of a surprise to me, is that a lot of men that have gone out as church planters, they don't know what to do. They hit the field and there's been no formal training, and so they're not exactly sure, well, what do I do next? Or am I doing the right things? The first things. And so a gospel coach who understands church planting methodology, understands the seasons, or what we call the phases, or a story, they understand the chapters of what a church planter is, they're able to help that planter think through strategically. But here's the thing that, again, goes back to that combination of strategic thinking, or putting together ministry plans or implementing ministry plans alongside of what the heart is. We're making sure that the planter is not fulfilling or not going after his own idol of success or a way in which to make a name for himself, but is actually planting a church for the glory of God and the glory of Christ. In renewal, we're working with leaders that are in the church renewal business. So I can think of Sam, who had gone to this church. He was 2 years into it. That Sam's not his real name, by the way, but things were not really coming together, and he was having a hard time with his leadership, trying to make some of the changes. They had said they wanted to change, but he discovered soon into it that there was resistance to change, the kind of changes that they needed to make. Through coaching, though, I was able to help him to see that change, the kinds of changes that he wanted to make, were topical kinds of changes and not systemic changes, and that to get to the systemic changes, the gospel itself had to get back down into the people themselves. And so he worked out a strategy of how to teach the gospel then at the most basic level, the down levels within his church, through disciple making, Sunday school classes, and he worked on what we would call gospel renewal in the lives of the people first, going after their hearts, before he tried to make topical changes, in the organization to make those things happen. But it was only through talking it out himself and coming to those realizations in a coaching situation where that began to make sense to him. And then he could think, he had the margin in this coaching time to think about, well, how would I implement that in this church? In what places would those things begin to be inserted to it? And so with the dynamic of the gospel and prayer, another realization that he had was he realized that we have not been dependent upon the Lord to bring about these changes in the church. I've read these books on strategic thinking and renewal, and I've been trying to follow their process without following the Lord's spiritual intervention through the Holy Spirit in the lives of the people. So those coaching conversations every 2 weeks actually gave him that margin to think, those times to think about it. So one of the unique differences of gospel coaching versus, say, life coaching or business coaching, you really have two in the world of coaching, and there's a myriad of coaching practices out there now and ways to do this. Some very big-wig, well-known, high-paying people that get paid well to coach. Basically, if you looked at it on a spectrum, there are two large extremes. One is the coach is a consultant. The coach comes in and tells you what to do. Here's the solution. Here's what you need to do. Follow these 3 things. Do these 5 steps or whatever. And that's really a coach more like a consultant. But they call themselves coaches, business coaches. But they're really consulting. Go all the way over to the other extreme on this spectrum, and you have life coaching or what is called non-directive coaching. Non-directive coaching has a philosophy of understanding, a theology, if you will, of man, of the human heart, which basically says that the solution is inside the person. The problem may be out there. The solution is in and of the person, and so you as a coach only ask questions and you try to draw out of that person because the answer's within them, and you need to unleash this inner self, the inner good of the person who can find the solutions to their problems. That's called non-directive coaching. So I'll just speak about the non-directive approach because that's kind of the biggest game that's out there right now. It's antithetical to what God says about the human heart. It's antithetical to good gospel theology. The answer, the Bible says, is not within you. You deceive yourself all the time. I say in our training, the person who lies to me the most is me. I lie to myself the most, whether it's in believing the lies of fear or believing the lies of pride. And so the answer is not within and of the person. What's in and of the person is self-reliance, blindness, self-agenda. And a gospel coach is able to get in behind that with them and to show them the brilliance and the beauty and the wonder of a God who loves them, a God who's given himself for that person, and the freeness that comes in believing that the problem that I face is not out there. The problem is actually in here. And Jesus has come to release me from that problem. And now, because of what Jesus has done for me, and is doing on my behalf, I can approach these issues that are out there. Because they're not crises in a truest sense. They're not blocks to what God's doing in this world. Those things actually become platforms by which Jesus is renewing me and renewing the world that's around him, through those things. So it becomes a different dynamics. It's a completely different side of the coin. And there's a place for consulting. Certainly, there's a place for consultants. We do consulting at CMM, but that's a different animal to me. That's not really coaching. That's more consulting. Yeah, it's very interesting. A lot of people in the Christian world, historically have kind of resisted this whole movement of coaching. And coaching comes from the Greek word koche in the New Testament, which is, no, it doesn't. It's not there. I completely made that up. But the principle of coaching, there actually is biblical examples of leaders along the way who actually, we're using a modern term. That's not unbiblical to use modern terminology for things that you see in the scriptures. So Jethro coming to Moses when Moses was struggling leading, and he came to him, and you could say he was a business coach. He came to Moses and he said, look, what you're doing is not good. It's not good for you, and it's not good for the people. And he helped Moses with a strategy of how he could rule and judge the people. So in that sense, his father-in-law was a coach to him. He was a business coach to him in terms of a methodology of how to best administer justice to the people. In the New Testament, you have leaders like Paul, who was totally invested in the development of his younger pastoral staff. I could argue, and I do, I try to make the argument that his relationship with Timothy or with Titus was more than disciple making or those kind of things. He wrote letters of instruction to them how to pastorally lead a church, how to pastorally care for a congregation. So in a sense, he was giving coaching advice. That's a term that we would use in our 21st century. He was giving them direction on how to practically work out ministry kinds of objectives in the church. Along the way in church history, Jonathan Edwards was a man who brought pastors in, young ministers into his own home and trained them. He had his own little community school kind of thing that they lived with him. And as they went out and pastored their own churches, he wrote hundreds and hundreds of letters to these men that he was pastoring. I would call them coaching calls. Obviously it was correspondence. They didn't have Zoom, and they didn't have, they were hundreds of miles away sometimes. But they would write Jonathan Edwards with a question, and Jonathan Edwards would help them think through what the solution is for them. So in that sense, I could argue that they were still coaching people, coaching ministers and coaching other pastors along the way. So it's not a huge stretch. It's different than mentoring. I have mentored, right now I'm not, but I've mentored other men, younger men. And mentoring is more holistic in life. Mentoring, they come and ask questions about a myriad of different issues. It's not about a role. Coaching has got to do with a specific functional leadership role: pastor, church planter, elder, small group leader, renewal pastor, leading a nonprofit organization. Those kind of things have to do with the role and the function of what they're doing, and coaching helps them in that specific role. Mentoring is more holistic in life. So these men that I've mentored along the way, 20 years younger than myself, but when we meet, they're asking a myriad of questions about raising their children. I'm thinking about taking on another job. We're trying to figure out, where our child's going to go to college. We're trying to figure out, should we put them in Christian school or move them to another school? There are questions about their profession. Sometimes they have questions about how should they use their resources, their finances, so it's and spiritual questions. The church has asked me to become an elder. I don't know if I should take that role, or so it's a myriad of life kinds of issues of where they are in the season of life. And a mentor is somebody who's got some distance, has had some life experience, and can share story, can share example, can give perspective to that person. But it's not about a specific role. It's kind of a whole of life kind of issue. So those would be the differences to me about coaching and about gospel coaching, and why it's not an unbiblical concept. We don't have the word, but then again, we don't have the word mentor in the Bible either for us. So, but we sort of cherish that idea.